When I attended Crippled Children's Hospital and School in Sioux Falls, one of the things, there was kids there from all over South Dakota, and one of the things that they did every so often, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it when I was in 7th grade, and that was something called the traveling classroom. What they did was they took a bus, regular like a Greyhound type of bus, and starting in Sioux Falls, of course, for 10 days we toured South Dakota. First stop actually turned out to be where I currently live in Brookings, South Dakota. And some of the features that I remember was we went to the Harvey Dunn Art Museum, and also Nick's Hamburger Shop is where we had lunch that day. As I recall, a hamburger, chips, and a Coke. From there we went to Millbank in the afternoon, and we got to see cheese being made, and then we ended up and also gravestones at a quarry up there, and then we ended up staying in Millbank that night. The next day we went over to Sisseton, and specifically Fort Sisseton, and it was just kind of starting then. So there wasn't a lot of improved area, but it was interesting to see. And then we went from there over to Aberdeen. That's where we stayed that night. As I recall, now that's a little bit fuzzy for sure, but I believe the next morning we ended up going to Redfield, but I'm not sure of that. We either went to Redfield that morning or the next day. Either way, we ended up going to Mobridge and spent a little time up there. We spent the next night in Huron, and then if we hadn't gone to Redfield that morning, we went that next morning. And Huron we stayed, as I recall, in the Plains Motel, where there's a great big pheasant out in front. Of course, that's why you might remember that. And one of the things I need to mention about when we went to Redfield is we stopped at the state hospital. And one of the things that I really realized was, as much as I disliked being at Crippled Children's, I absolutely would not have wanted to have to be at the state hospital. The conditions were sad, but they did have very good homemade bread. Along in there, we stopped at a Hutterite colony and toured that and learned a lot about their culture and about Hutterites. We then went on to Pierre, where I believe we stayed that night, and then we went to Fort Pierre and toured the Oahe Dam a little bit and stuff, and then later ended up going down to Wall and through Wall, and of course we had to stop at Wall Drug, and we had our buffalo burgers, and at Wall Drug, as I recall, I bought a cowboy hat. One of the nice things about this whole trip was that they gave us some film for our cameras, if we had a camera, which I did. So as I recall, I got 2 black and white films and 1 color, and so I took quite a few pictures. From Wall Drug, then we went to Rapid City. We ended up staying in Rapid City for 3 nights. Interestingly enough, we stayed in a motel that was kind of a little bit on the rundown side. Turns out that a few years later, that was swept away in the floods, which, since the traveling classroom happened in mid-May, it actually would have only been a few weeks and of course years. But the Rapid City flood was in June 6th, as I recall. Just a few years after that. We did tour, we went to Mount Rushmore, and at Mount Rushmore we actually, someone from my hometown, one of the Red O'Doll boys, I believe Dean, but I'm not positive, was there, and so we got pictures with them and stuff, because there was always some publicity things along with this as well. I should also mention that pretty much everywhere we stopped, we had a girls' choir that sang. Thankfully, they didn't ask me to sing, or people would have not been donating very much money if I was singing. We then went to Hot Springs. One of the things was, though, that Evans Plunge happened to be closed at the time, so we didn't. There had been some time scheduled for that, but that didn't work out. So we ended up with a bit of an afternoon off to just sit around and stuff. And then from there, when we left, we finally traveled to Mitchell, stopped at the Corn Palace and some things like that. And then we went south of Mitchell on Highway 37. Unfortunately, we didn't pass through Scotland, where I'm from. We did. We were a few miles west of there. We then spent that next night in Yankton, and we got to tour the Gavin's Point Dam. We actually got to go inside, in the dam buildings and stuff, and that was really kind of interesting to me. I remember when they were talking about synchronizing clocks and how the speed of the dam of the turbines actually was important to that and how that all worked, and I found that very fascinating. And then from there, from Yankton, we went through Vermilion and stopped and saw a couple things. And, it was getting kind of a long trip. I was only in 7th grade, and it was kind of one of those things, but it really had a tremendous impact on me, and I'm very thankful that I was able to do that and be part of that. And then, of course, from there, we went back to Sioux Falls.